So I was really surprised recently with this new game that has come out, and it wasn't something that was totally on my radar or something to be very excited about. However, I can't stop playing this game. I am literally addicted to it to a very extreme level. I think I've put in just this weekend like 12 or 13 hours. I really can't stop playing it. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure why. It's not the greatest built game. It doesn't have the craziest mechanics or even the greatest story. It's not by an IP that I'm familiar with or even interested in, yet there's just this really great appeal to it, and I think a lot of it has to do with the actual gameplay. So, not to drag this on too long, but the game's called Farmagia. I talked about it a little bit before because it was made by, or the art was done by the person who made Fairy Tail, which is an incredibly popular anime, and not one that I really particularly cared for. Honestly, I think the art's kind of cool too, but I'm not really super into the art either. The big wide-eyed people and, you know, everyone's just kind of so stylistic that they look kind of identical to each other. Makes it not hyper interesting to me. However, it works, and it's, you know, a high quality, and I think it really shines through in this game, surprisingly, too. I think one of the things that I like most about the game is that it seems to be gameplay forward. So the game design isn't just based off of another IP where they're trying to fit mechanics into a world that's already predefined, but instead, just like a normal game that's not based off anything, the whole game is just kind of crafted completely centric around mechanics, and the mechanics all work together to make something that I think is just incredibly fun, if not wildly repetitious. If you look at the reviews that they have on Steam for it, it's really super mixed, and honestly I wasn't even going to buy it at first because it was $50 and I just didn't really know what to think about it. One of the reviews that stuck out to me is somebody said that you're gonna love it or hate it, but they personally felt like the game reminded them of N-Train Odyssey, which is one of my favorite game series. It's kind of a dungeon crawler system, and it is highly repetitive. You are doing the same things over and over again, but you're kind of slowly building your strength and your stats up to go farther and farther each time. And there's kind of a draw to this power creep where you become more and more powerful until you're something that's like impressive. Things start feeling easier. You start feeling good about those accomplishments that you have. And I think in a lot of ways they hit this right on the money. Initially what I thought was a farming game, because it seems like a farming game, it's called Farmagia, really isn't anything quite like that. There is farming, but the farming is just a very small part of the full mechanics in this entire game system, and most of what you're doing is traveling through these mazes, which I will admit, mazes definitely could use a ton of work. If they ever made a second one of these games, I would highly suggest that they go way farther out trying to make these things more dynamic and interesting, because so far, even in the different areas, they all feel exactly the same. So I said the story wasn't that great, and you know, I think if anyone said that it was, they really like very simplistic, basic kind of anime premises. The world's set somewhere that at one point they called it Underworld. It's kind of just a different world. And it's a big world, big ocean, a lot of different islands. And on these different islands are kind of these generals that run them with a big overseer on top of it all. It's very magic based. Everyone has magic and magic power, and they have a skill that they use for their power base, and that power base is called Farmagia. Well, that power base makes them called Farmagia, which is like a title that they have. And the naming conventions in this game, I'll just throw right out there, they're terrible. Everything's really stupid. The main world is called Felicidad, which literally just reminds me of Feliz Navidad, the song. that they just smash together, and a lot of the things are like that. I haven't seen a lot of Fairy Tail. Maybe that's a really common thing. I find it pretty stupid, but it's fine because the rest of the game is just so dang addicting. I think you could critique this game all day. You could say all sorts of terrible things about it because of all these weird little nitpicks, but the reality really is that it's very addicting, and I have a crap load of fun with it. So that's really what matters to me. So essentially how the Farmagia powers work is incredibly simple. You have this tiny, tiny little plot of land to start off with, and as you go through the dungeons and you defeat enemies, you'll get seeds from them. You can probably guess it, the enemies you defeat are the seeds that you get for those enemies, and you can use them as your creatures to fight in your party with you somewhat. Now, they're split into a bunch of different categories, and as much as I've played the game, I haven't unlocked all the categories yet, but the starter ones that you get are your battle buddies, which are just the guys that you take into combat with you. And they're split into one of 4 categories as well, which I'll get into a little bit later. You also have other monsters that are called research buddies, and they give you kind of extra bonuses and can be attached into your monster party battle buddies. They'll do different things depending on how strong your battle buddy is. They'll need to reach a certain strength level before they can become strong enough to equip that helper, basically. So basically the majority of the story is centered around kind of these different factions that are warring. The king of all the different factions, he dies, and there's kind of an uprising that takes over all the islands but one. You guessed it, your main character is on the one island that wasn't taken over. And the leader for your island works with you and finds out that you have all this potential and all these great skills that can help aid the battle and try to take over everything. Some of the plot points get pretty weird and confusing to me and don't really make sense. Initially, the bad side is kind of explained as if they're trying to create like a utopia where they share their magic with everyone and everyone becomes incredibly powerful, and everyone prospers because they're united and sharing their gifts instead of keeping them isolated into one of their particular areas. However, it's kind of later revealed that it's going to be kind of a dystopian society where those who are not strong enough to have their magic to share are going to be punished. And so they inherently become the bad guys. I don't completely know where it's all going, and there is little twists and turns as the story continues to develop, but like I said, it's just not really super well written. It just kind of services the push for the gameplay that goes forward, and it works really well. It always is taking you to different areas. It's giving you different quests and different sets of missions to do, and it just always kind of feels like you're getting more powerful and you're moving towards something, and there's always something different, and there's always something new that's unlocking, and there's just I think there's a very addictive quality in that for people who like that kind of thing. And I think that's why the reviews are so mixed right now, because it's just not something that everybody is into. Some people want great story, they want really incredible action and stuff like that. And I think the action is really great to me, but it's repetitive, and we hear that as a critique in video games all the time, that repetition is just so horrible. So really the main gameplay loop of the game has to do with kind of going from storyline to storyline, which kind of is displayed like a visual novel as you'd expect. But the segments are really kind of quick and they get over really fast. So if you don't like visual novels, it's not going to drag you down, making you sit there for 20, 30 minutes at a time, listening to people talk and different story elements. You'll cut into it, and then you'll just go right back into fighting and farming again. Also, I was actually kind of surprised. The farming elements are super fast. Like, you go into this farm area, you drop some seeds, you water, you clean your field. Doesn't take hardly any time at all. You get everything prepped up for how you want, and then you move on. You need a certain amount of points, which are expended like your stamina, and those points regenerate every time you go into a maze and come back out. So if you don't have enough points, all you have to do is just go to basically the easiest dungeon, which I do all the time, and just run through it super fast, which becomes incredibly quick a little bit later in the game. I mean, really, very quickly, you can go through that first dungeon really quick. And then you get all your farm points back, and you can continue your farming. Overall, it works really, really well, and just makes everything kind of quick-paced and fun. Now, as far as the combat goes, I told you that there is different categories that your battle buddies get set into, and one of them's close-range attack, one of them's long-range attack, and then there's support, and the other one's called formation. Now, the close-range attack and the long-range attack, you can very easily guess what those do. They attack close or they attack far. And different enemies are going to be strong or weak with them, and every map will kind of tell you what they suggest for your party build. The support ones offer support in different ways. Initially, the first support option that you get is adding poison and debuffs. All of them are really easy to use, and there's really not any sort of problem getting the hang of the combat right away, with the exception of the formation. So when you're using your attack and your support, you'll hold the button that corresponds with them on your keypad. Obviously, you have A, B, X, and Y, and each of the categories is assigned to one of those buttons. And you hold that button down, and it slowly drip feeds out those monsters to the monster that you're attacking, that you've locked onto or are focusing towards. So the formation ones instead kind of dictate where the placement of all your team members you've dispatched are. So you would send out the formation ones, and then you'd steer them left, right, forward to move them away from enemy attacks. And enemy attacks in multiple different ways, and they have multiple different attacks. And one of the things that I actually find the funnest with the game is that the enemies all are very varied in their timings and the strategies on how you go to fight them. They kind of have three sort of attacks. One is their basic attack, and when they do it, it lets out a little starburst, which gives you time to parry. We'll talk about that in a minute. The second is a red starburst that they do, and it's kind of an attack that you can't parry, so you have to maneuver yourself and your battle buddies away from where that attack is going to land. The third attack that they do is basically the same as the second type of attack, but it's usually just like a huge area or something really large and powerful that they do that you got to get out of there. And like I said, every enemy is different, and the bosses are totally different as well. And you just got to clear out of the way, move everyone out of the way. When your battle buddies die, it's pretty easy to deal with. You just have to walk over to them or go near them and do your parry shield attack, and it'll revive them up, and then they'll continue to fight for you. Your battle buddies can only last out there for so long too, so you're constantly going to have to pay attention to who's out, how many you put your whole supply out to the enemy, have some come back, all that different stuff. I mean, there's just a lot of maneuvering your units around the map. Everything's happening really fast and really quickly, and I think that's another part of what just makes it so addictive. You're just kind of constantly engaging with the environments during the time that enemies are out. Another mechanic that's in the game that I haven't mentioned yet is these kind of elementals, which are spirits, and each island kind of has one that is kind of their, I don't know, god of the land. And that person has a lot of power, and they kind of help sustain that island. And as the game progresses, you find out that, yeah, you're gonna need their help. And so that's kind of where I'm hesitant to say like a romance option comes through, but it kind of plays out a similar way that romance in visual novels work, where you're talking with this person, giving them gifts, interacting with them, and doing things like quests for them that you need to complete in order to increase their heart level, which will give you more bonuses to your mega fights. So the last thing as far as your combat options have to do with these mechanics, and I can never remember the name. There's so many different names for all these different mechanics, but I think one's called a blitz, where basically if you've dodged the enemy so many times, perfect parry them enough times, then you're going to be able to build up your meter and use your blitz. And the blitzes are set up specifically for each of the types of battle buddies that you have. And there's a 2-button combo that you use for it, which is always RT and then ABX or Y. One of the nice things that the game does is when you've built up enough energy to use them, they'll put the icon over that enemy's head that you've perfect parried enough, and that will allow you to know to start to use this. So you'll use that skill, and it kind of piles that one type of battle buddy onto the enemy and does a very big damage to them, and it also kind of knocks them unconscious. When that enemy is unconscious, you can hit RB, and then you do what I think is called a unite skill, and it kind of takes all of your battle buddies and piles them on, kind of like an all-out attack in Persona, if you're familiar with that mechanic. It does a huge amount of damage, and when you're fighting really super big enemies with big puffy HP levels, it's definitely a necessity. The other thing that you also do is you build up power, where you can summon kind of this supersized creature that's based off of your elemental, which we'll talk about later. And that supersized creature will come and do a giant attack that does huge damage to basically everything in the area. And this is one of those things that you kind of save up and use when you're fighting something that's particularly tough. Another really cool thing that they have during the maze exploration is a set of like little extra quests that you can do. They tally up on the side, and they say it's different every time. They're randomized. So sometimes you need to do so many perfect dodges and so many blitz usages. There's a bunch of different things that they want you to do. And if you can complete all of those challenges before the maze is over, after you fight the big boss, you'll get kind of a bonus to your money or mech. As far as the audio goes, I think it's one of the shining points. They have really, really good VO, which I guess we kind of just expect now, but it seems like they used a bunch of, you know, big brand anime voice actors, and they brought them out to voice all the different characters, and I think they did a really great job. There is English and Japanese tracks, which you can do. And I've been kind of lazy, and I do the English ones because sometimes I just don't want to pay all that much attention and do that much more reading. There's also cutscenes that they have in the game as well. They are very, very few, and they're usually really, really short and rather simplistic, but I did think that they help bolster some of the moments when you fight like these really big bosses, or you have these really big story moments with everything. Everything just works together really, really, really good. And I don't know, there's a lot of arguments people have about, you know, what's the best thing in games? Like, do you play for the story? Do you play for the gameplay? And I think this is one of those games that really, really is gameplay heavy. Everything intertwines very, very well. Not perfectly, but it intertwines really, really well. And I think it's a game that really showcases why good gameplay is so exciting for some people. Personally, I'm a story guy, but I'm very much enjoying just the gameplay elements of this, and they've made it really, really addictive, which I can't say enough. I'm kind of upset. I've waited years for Metaphor to come out, and I have poured more hours into Farmagia. I hate to admit that. I cannot stop playing it. Also, it runs on the Steam Deck really, really good. You can max all the graphics out, and you know, the standard 800p resolution, and it runs really good. The loading's really quick. Really no issues with it whatsoever. I play it on the Steam Deck a ton. It does do cross saves, so you get your cloud saves, and you can jump between PC and handheld, which I do a ton. I get kind of tired of sitting in my seat, and I'll jump off and I'll play on the handheld, and it just works Really buttery smooth and really easy. Also with the audio, I think the music's pretty good too. It's very stereotypical anime, kind of fantasy feeling music, and some people are gonna like it, some people aren't, but it sits in the background just fine. Builds up the emotional parts of the moments just fine. Nothing's really kind of mind-blowing or shocking or like, wow, this is the greatest score ever, but it all works really well, and I really enjoy listening to it. It doesn't ever get annoying. It's kind of reminds me of those classic soundtracks where it sits in the background and then you don't realize it, but when you're not playing the game, you kind of have the little tunes stuck in your head that you hear for the parts that you do so much, which I think is a pretty great thing. That's a sign that it's not bad music at all.
See you later.
And sound effects are also pretty regular for what you'd expect for that kind of fairy tale anime, just kind of
Look here.
basic stuff, which is totally fine. Overall, I think this game personally is really great. I thoroughly enjoy it. I am definitely going to keep playing it until I beat it. There's many flaws with it, and it's not the perfect game. The repetition and the dungeons being exactly the same feeling over and over again is a pretty big downside to me, but it just doesn't hurt the overall product. Some people disagree, some people don't. It's definitely one of those niche games that's for you or isn't, but if you expected a farming simulator game, which, like I said, I initially thought it was as well, it's not. It's not even close to it. It's kind of a battle management type game. Something like I've never played before, and if you guys have played games that are like this and have anything to suggest to me, I would absolutely love it, because it just feels really fresh and different and completely unlike anything I've played before. I'm Dre with Otaku. If you like this content, hit the thumbs up. If you don't, hit the thumbs down and subscribe for more anime, news, reviews, gaming, and other otaku culture stuff.